Hi, everybody. This is Molly McCord, and welcome to today's broadcast, where I'm going to share with you one of our short stories from our book, Modern Heroine Soul Stories. Now, this was a book that was compiled and published in 2017. It was a passion project of mine to bring together these stories from 24 different women and for them to offer you their healing lessons, wisdom, in the understanding that you could use it with the intention that you could benefit from what they've been through on their path. More about this book is below this video, and it's important to note that 100% of the book royalties are being donated to Women for Women International, a stellar organization really helping thousands of women around the world, not just women, but families, communities, everyone that is connected with this program. So please know that we have intentions to improve the world with this book project, and that it's through these individual stories that you might receive exactly what you need as well. So this chapter is called She Dances Her Way Back to Happiness, and it's written by Lili Krnic. And I will be narrating this. Divorce. The word itself feels heavy and final and acidic, just as the process tends to be. It's the end of love, the end of trying, the end of hope. The loss of hope is always the hardest for an eternal optimist. Hope is what propels us forward in life, a driving energy that gets us through the challenging times. It's only when hope finally dies that we have nothing left to justify our unhappiness. One hot January night, while in one of my favorite places in the world, my hope was extinguished. On vacation to rekindle our strained marriage, my husband and I had every reason to be happy and relaxed. We were child-free for the trip, and surrounded by the luscious, most vibrant examples of nature to be found. Families of monkeys were swinging in plain sight, iguanas scurried in all directions, jewel-toned butterflies floated above our heads, and the ocean was visible in the distance. This backdrop was one I had longed for since the last time I had been to Central America 3 years earlier. It was the one place that made me feel most alive when, for the most part, I was feeling increasingly dead inside. I was a wife, mother, teacher, and business owner, but as each of those roles increased in scope, I lost more and more of myself. It didn't help that I was married to a man who didn't understand the meaning of true partnership and lived his life with no regard for my thoughts or feelings. It didn't help that I was essentially a single mother, cloaked in the disguise of a healthy marriage, waiting patiently for the day when my marriage would morph into that beautiful, loving, respectful union that my heart longed for. I would regularly talk myself out of this longing because I tried to convince myself that such relationships didn't exist or that I was just too demanding. Tone down your expectations, I told myself. Want less. Be happy with what you've got. Look at the positive. Don't complain. No marriage is perfect. Ignore the ache in your heart. Toughen up and dry your tears. Think of the kids. Maybe you're the problem. So work on yourself. Go back to therapy. Read another self-help book. In any case, these messages were also what my husband continuously told me, and I had started to believe them. I had been steadfast in my devotion to the marriage, despite the constant negation from my husband. As each year passed, and increasingly since the birth of our children, there was less and less room allowed for me. I was saddled with all of the child care responsibilities and most of the work related to the upkeep of our home, as well as our own nourishing. My husband found many excuses to be busy, and if there was ever a hint of resentment from me because he was not available, yet one more evening, there would be the trusty reason that he was busy with something work-related. My frustration mounted as I spent month after month playing both mommy and daddy to our boys. If I had received some level of appreciation or support, it could have been tolerable, but instead, I was expected to lavish appreciation on my husband's efforts, even when they moved our family backwards. I swam in this mess of emotions for years, gradually feeling the heavier and heavier burden of caring for both of our sons and the responsibility for business ventures I didn't choose. Despite my clear opposition to a business idea, my husband had decided to use a chunk of our money to fund the opening of a bakery, ignoring the fact that he had no experience or knowledge of the field. Soon I found myself running a shop selling the very things I previously counseled people to avoid eating. My integrity was stretched to its edge. However, marriage is such that unless you are prepared to divorce, you are forced to accept and deal with every decision, good or bad, that your partner makes. And my husband leveraged the fact that he knew I wasn't going anywhere. Dismissive of my concerns, he would often taunt me by saying, "If you don't like things, go back and live with your mother," knowing this was a worse alternative for me than staying with him. But that day in January, in my real-world paradise, as I sat in our beautiful, glass-crafted boutique hotel room, I got pushed to a limit I didn't even know existed. Finally, with time to talk and no distractions of children or work, I pressed him to answer the questions about our finances that he never wanted to address back home. "How much of our money have you spent?" I asked. Silence. Always silence from him. It was an avoidance tactic I had grown to loathe. My instincts told me the answer was bad. It turned out he had spent all of the money from the recent sale of our home. As a mother of two small children who had already turned the corner of 40, I was gutted. My past and my future both disappeared with that revelation of financial loss, as the relationship I had cultivated for 12 years crumbled before my eyes, taking with it all of my expectations of security for the years ahead. In that moment, it became very clear that I could no longer continue being an accomplice in my own annihilation. That night, I sobbed and screamed like I never had before and prayed never to again. In that glass room, a fishbowl with little more than sheer white curtains shielding me from the next guest, mere 6 feet away, I was finally done. All lingering hope was completely sucked out of me. I cried so hard I made myself sick. Saying I was actually sick was a convenient excuse for the red eyes and the runny nose that the hotel staff considerately inquired about. It helped explain the sullen look on my face as I quickly passed the happy honeymooning couples with their shining eyes. I couldn't eat, and I could barely drink. My body went into such shock that I didn't move my bowels for 8 days. By the time I finally did, it was painful, and I was in pain beyond my body's knowingness. I spent much of that trip on the cold cement floor because it was the only flat space in our room. My husband got the bed. He always did. And while I grieved my life as I knew it, my marriage, my family, my future, he watched action movies on his laptop. Occasionally, he would look at me on the floor with the same detachment with which he watched his movies. I kept waiting for, hoping for, some emotion, but nothing came. It didn't seem possible that we were sharing the same reality. I had had so many small reasons to leave my husband before that, but not one that I believed was big enough. If I had piled up all the small reasons, one on top of the other, I would have been able to see a valid excuse to leave. But when you obligate yourself to look on the bright side and to persevere for love and family, you train yourself to forgive and forget regularly, sometimes daily, even hourly. Divorcing was hard, very hard, perhaps the hardest thing I've ever had to do. Leaving behind 12 years of a life built with a spouse and a family, no matter how fractured, was the impossible decision that I eventually made. If I wasn't going to listen to all the smaller warnings life was continuously presenting to me, I would have to finally pay attention to the big one, that there wasn't room in my marriage for two equals, only one inflated ego. And it was with that ultimate example of selfishness and disrespect that I finally had my big enough reason. I finally felt justified in my decision to leave. In the following months, I grieved for my marriage and the loss of my intact nuclear family. With the help of a therapist, I came to understand that what I grieved for the most was the loss of my dream of a marriage and a family, since the reality was not at all what I had envisioned. Letting go of all the hopes for what could have been was ultimately what eased my suffering. Once I was able to let go of the fantasy that I had carried with me for so long, it was easier to put my focus where it should be, on rebuilding my life in such a way that I could be the best mother for my sons, and the best version of myself, for myself, and for everyone else. Having been so busy with all the responsibilities that had been piled on me while married, I hadn't had time to come up for air for a very long time. I had had very little time for anything that was important to my own growth and happiness. So during the times that my sons were with their father, I began to do things that nourished my spirit and allowed me to remember why life was worth living. I realized dance was one of the few things that made me feel better while I was dealing with so much despair. So when my friends asked me what I wanted to do for my birthday, I told them I wanted to go dancing. And we did. We put on our sneakers and went to a club filled with people almost half our age, and we danced. I danced until I could feel the smile return to my face, and I knew I had to keep dancing. I continued to go dancing with my girlfriends to places where I could lose myself in crowds, and strangers began commenting on how happy I looked. I went to Zumba class and moved my hips in ways that I had never felt free to do in any other space. I went to ecstatic dance, where I moved my way through emotions that my body was desperate to release. Eventually, I danced my way back to the me that I knew was still there, buried under years of unhappiness and sacrifice. The me that took pleasure in feeling the rhythm in my body and the joy from expressing that rhythm in my own way. When I danced, I was ageless and problem-free. Dancing was my medicine, my meditation, my prayer. When I danced, I was in that rare space where I was happy to be me again. Almost immediately, dancing began to change and heal me in a way I couldn't foresee. By allowing myself to do what I love to do, my days began to feel lighter, and I began to feel more optimistic. And with that optimism came a flow and ease that I hadn't anticipated. Things in my life began working out. I managed to buy a house with very little to my name, and despite 1,000 obstacles. I was thriving at a new job in a new field that I loved. I eventually began to date some fabulous men, and I even found myself enjoying being single. After about a year, I attracted an incredible man into my life who I adore and who adores me. I am grateful every day for how easy and open our relationship is. Today, I live my life differently than I ever have. I don't continuously sacrifice all my needs and desires so that others can be comfortable. I play full out in my life, and I regularly make space for the things that bring me joy. whether it's dance, travel, art, or the appreciation of beauty. Once upon a time, I believed that I needed to set aside my own happiness in order to increase that of another's. Now I realize that my happiness adds to the lives of others. The world doesn't need more unhappy people trying to do the right thing. It needs more laughter and smiles, as do my children. This is the legacy I aspire to leave, a life lived in the pursuit of love, joy, and the happy, hopeful possibility of being fully alive. So I hope that personal story by Lili offers you insights into what you can do to take ownership over your energy, your life, your choices, and to find what makes you happy right now, because that is then the energy you share with others. Thank you for joining me as I read to you chapters from Modern Heroine Soul Stories, and I'll be back to read another chapter for you soon. Thank you so much for joining me.